Okay, so let me tell you something that's got me heated today. Donald Trump, yes, the same man who incited an insurrection on January 6th, has the audacity, the absolute nerve to call Democrats seditious. Child, you cannot make this up. This man literally told a mob to march to the Capitol, watch them beat up police officers on live television, and then sat in the White House eating Big Macs while people died. But now he wants to talk about sedition? Now he wants to talk about who's loyal to this country and who's not. Y'all, I'm standing here in the Capitol right now, the same building that was attacked, and I gotta tell you, the hypocrisy is so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Because while Trump is pointing fingers at Democrats for doing our constitutional duty, for holding him accountable, for standing up for the rule of law, this man has spent years defending actual criminals. I'm not talking about people he disagrees with politically. I'm talking about convicted felons. I'm talking about insurrectionists. I'm talking about people who committed real crimes, documented, prosecuted, proven in court, and this man either pardoned them, defended them, or is planning to let them off the hook. So today, I'm gonna break down exactly what Trump means when he calls Democrats seditious, and I'm gonna show you who he's actually been protecting. Because listen, the receipts are clear, and they tell a story that every American needs to hear. Now let me give y'all some context, because this didn't start yesterday. Trump has been using this word seditious and throwing around terms like treason and enemies of the state for anyone who dares to hold him accountable. He's called Democrats seditious for investigating his crimes. He's called prosecutors seditious for indicting him. He's called judges seditious for ruling against him. Basically, if you believe in the Constitution and the rule of law, Trump thinks you're committing treason. But here's what sedition actually means, and I say this as someone with a law degree who actually understands these terms. Sedition is conduct or speech that incites people to rebel against the authority of the state. It's about undermining the government, encouraging insurrection, trying to overthrow the established order. Sound familiar? Because that's literally what Trump did on January 6th, 2021. Let me remind y'all what happened that day. Trump spent months lying about the election being stolen. No evidence, just lies. He pressured state officials to find votes. He tried to get his vice president to illegally overturn the election results. And when none of that worked, he held a rally where he told thousands of angry supporters to march to the Capitol and fight like hell or they wouldn't have a country anymore. Then he sat back and watched as they broke into this building, assaulted over 140 police officers, hunted for lawmakers, including me, and tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. More than 1,000 people have been prosecuted for their actions on January 6th. These aren't political prosecutions. These are people who committed real crimes, breaking and entering, assaulting federal officers, destruction of government property, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. These folks were convicted by juries, sentenced by judges, many of them appointed by Republican presidents. The evidence was overwhelming: videos, confessions, witnesses, the whole 9 yards. Now, some of y'all might be wondering, well, what does Trump have to do with that? He wasn't the one breaking windows. And that's where we need to understand the pattern. Because Trump has spent the last 4 years defending these criminals, calling them patriots, promising to pardon them, and treating them like they're heroes instead of convicted felons. He's held fundraisers where he plays recordings of January 6th defendants singing the national anthem from jail. He salutes when their anthem plays at his rallies. He calls them hostages and political prisoners. And now, as he's back in power, he's actually following through on those promises. He's pardoning insurrectionists left and right. Meanwhile, he's calling Democrats, the people who defended this building, who protected the Constitution, who voted to certify a legitimate election, seditious. Child, the irony is so thick it hurts. So let's talk about this hypocrisy, because it's not just insulting, it's dangerous. Trump wants to call Democrats seditious for doing our jobs, for following the Constitution, for participating in the democratic process. But let me tell you who Trump has actually defended, who he's actually protected, who he's actually called patriots. First, there's the January 6th rioters themselves. We're talking about people who were convicted of serious felonies, people like Guy Reffitt, who brought a gun to the Capitol and threatened House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He was convicted by a jury and sentenced to over 7 years in prison. Trump calls him a patriot. We're talking about people like Thomas Webster, a former Marine who beat a police officer with a flagpole and tried to gouge out his eyes. Convicted, sentenced. Trump wants to pardon him. Oh, and let's not forget the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, literal domestic terrorist organizations whose leaders were convicted of seditious conspiracy. Yes, actual sedition. Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, was found guilty of plotting to use force to oppose the lawful transfer of power. Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys, same thing, seditious conspiracy. These men were convicted by juries who heard weeks of evidence about their plans to attack our government. And Trump has signaled he wants to pardon them too. Now let me be clear about what seditious conspiracy is, because this is important. It's when two or more people conspire to use force to overthrow the government, oppose its authority, or prevent the execution of federal law. That's not me being dramatic, that's the legal definition. And a jury of regular Americans looked at the evidence and said, yeah, these guys are guilty, but Trump sees them as heroes. Meanwhile, what are Democrats guilty of? Let me tell you what Trump calls seditious. We investigated his role in January 6th. That's congressional oversight, literally our constitutional duty. We voted to impeach him. That's a power explicitly given to Congress in the Constitution. We supported the appointment of a special counsel to investigate his theft of classified documents. That's the rule of law in action. We've called for accountability when he violated the Emoluments Clause, obstructed justice, and attempted to extort a foreign leader for political gain. Every single thing Democrats have done has been within the bounds of our constitutional authority. We've used the tools the founders gave us to check a president who thinks he's above the law. We've followed proper procedures. We've respected the courts even when we disagree with their rulings. We've accepted election results even when we lost. That's not sedition, that's democracy. But here's what really gets me. Trump doesn't just defend the January 6 criminals. His entire presidency was about protecting criminals in his own party. He pardoned Roger Stone, who was convicted of lying to Congress and witness tampering during the Russia investigation. He pardoned Paul Manafort, his campaign chairman, who was convicted of tax fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. He pardoned Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. He pardoned Steve Bannon, who was charged with defrauding Trump's own supporters in that border wall scam. Y'all see the pattern? When it's Trump's people, when it's his cronies, when it's people who can hurt him by telling the truth, suddenly he believes in mercy. Suddenly he thinks prosecutions are political. Suddenly he's handing out pardons like candy on Halloween. But when it's Democrats doing our constitutional duty, when it's prosecutors following evidence, when it's judges applying the law, we're seditious, we're traitors, we're enemies of the state. And here's the thing that really burns me up. Trump's defenders in Congress are right there with him. They're calling for investigations into Democrats. They're threatening prosecutors. They're talking about retribution and revenge. But when we bring up January 6th, when we mention the pardoned criminals, when we point out the actual law breaking, they tell us to move on. They say we're being divisive. They accuse us of playing politics. Child, wrong is wrong. Right is right. And ain't nothing political about the truth. Now, let me take y'all deeper into this, because the implications of what Trump is doing go way beyond just name calling and finger pointing. This is about fundamentally rewriting what we consider criminal behavior in this country and who gets to be above the law. Let's start with the numbers, because I got the receipts. As of right now, Trump has pardoned or commuted sentences for over 1,500 January 6 defendants. 1,500. That includes people convicted of assaulting police officers, the same police officers Republicans claim to support. It includes people convicted of weapons charges, people who made violent threats, people who destroyed government property. Some of these folks are back out on the streets after serving just weeks of multi-year sentences. Now, I know some people might say, well, maybe some of them were overcharged, maybe some of them just got caught up in the moment. And listen, I'm all for criminal justice reform. As someone who worked as a civil rights attorney, as someone who's fought for fair sentencing, I understand that our justice system isn't always perfect. But here's the difference. These January 6 defendants had their day in court. They had lawyers. They presented their defenses to juries. And those juries, made up of regular citizens, looked at the evidence and said guilty. Compare that to the people who are still sitting in prison right now for nonviolent drug offenses, for things they did when they were teenagers, for crimes that didn't hurt anybody. Where are their pardons? Where's Trump's mercy for them? I'll tell you where it is. It doesn't exist, because Trump's justice isn't about mercy or fairness. It's about loyalty. If you're loyal to him, if you committed crimes in his name or to protect him, you get a pass. If you're just a regular person who made a mistake, if you're not politically useful to him, you can rot in prison for all he cares. Let me tell you about some of the specific people Trump has defended, because their stories tell you everything you need to know about what he values. There's Kyle Young, who used a taser on Officer Michael Fanone while other rioters beat him unconscious. Officer Fanone suffered a heart attack and traumatic brain injury. Young was sentenced to 7 years. Trump calls him a political prisoner. There's David Dempsey, who assaulted police officers with flagpoles, crutches, pepper spray, and his fist. He hit one officer in the head so hard with a metal pole that the officer was knocked unconscious. Dempsey has a history of political violence going back years. He was sentenced to 20 years, one of the longest January 6 sentences, and Trump is considering pardoning him. There's Dominic Pezzola, a Proud Boy who smashed a Capitol window with a stolen police riot shield, allowing rioters to flood into the building. He was convicted of assaulting police and obstructing Congress. He got 10 years. Trump wants to free him. These aren't political prisoners. These are violent criminals. And the reason I keep saying that, the reason I keep emphasizing it, is because Trump and his allies are trying to gaslight the entire country into believing that these prosecutions were somehow political witch hunts. But y'all, I was here. I was in this building when it was under attack. I hid with my colleagues while these patriots hunted for us. I heard them chanting about hanging the vice president. I saw the damage they did, the officers they hurt, the terror they caused. And now Trump wants to tell me that the people who prosecuted these criminals are the seditious ones, that the FBI agents who investigated them are traitors, that the judges who sentenced them are enemies of the state. Child, please. Here's what this really means from a legal and constitutional standpoint. When a president pardons people who committed crimes to keep him in power, who attack the government to benefit him politically, that's not mercy, that's obstruction of justice. It's sending a message that political violence is acceptable if it's done in his name. It's telling future criminals that as long as they're loyal to Trump, they'll be protected. This is exactly what the founders worried about when they debated the pardon power. They knew a corrupt president could use pardons to protect co-conspirators, to encourage others to commit crimes on his behalf, to create a circle of people who are above the law. That's why impeachment exists, to remove a president who abuses the pardon power. But we all know how that worked out when Trump's Republican allies in the Senate refused to convict him. So now we're living in a country where the president can incite an attack on the Capitol, pardon the people who carried it out, and then call his political opponents seditious for trying to hold him accountable. If that doesn't terrify you, you're not paying attention. Now, let's talk about who exactly is enabling this, because Trump doesn't operate in a vacuum. He's got a whole crew of Republicans in Congress who are not only defending his actions, but actively participating in this rewriting of history. I'm talking about people like Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, who, by the way, was under federal investigation for sex trafficking before Trump made him Attorney General for a hot minute. Gaetz has been one of the loudest voices calling January 6 defendants political prisoners and demanding their release. This is the same Matt Gaetz who the Ethics Committee found substantial evidence against for sexual misconduct and illicit drug use. But sure, tell me more about who the real criminals are. I'm talking about Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, who visited January 6 defendants in jail and called them patriots. This is the same person who talked about Jewish space lasers, who harassed school shooting survivors, who got kicked off her committees for promoting violence. She's introduced resolutions to expunge Trump's impeachments and to commend the January 6th rioters for their bravery. I'm talking about Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, who raised his fist in solidarity with the mob outside the Capitol on January 6th and then ran like Usain Bolt when they breached the building. We got that on video, by the way. But now he wants to act tough by calling Democrats seditious for investigating what happened that day. I'm talking about Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio, who refused to comply with the January 6th committee subpoena, who likely had knowledge about Trump's plans before the attack, and who now chairs the Judiciary Committee and uses it to attack the prosecutors investigating Trump. This is the same Jim Jordan who ignored sexual abuse when he was a wrestling coach at Ohio State. Pattern of enabling criminals. Anyone? And let's not forget the people in Trump's inner circle. Steve Bannon, who was convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to testify about January 6th, got pardoned by Trump at the end of his first term. Peter Navarro, another Trump aide who was also convicted of contempt of Congress, served his time but is now back in the administration. Both of these men had information about what Trump knew and when he knew it regarding January 6th, and they refused to share it with investigators. That's obstruction, plain and simple. Then there's Kash Patel, who Trump installed to lead the FBI. Patel has openly said he wants to use the FBI to go after Trump's enemies, journalists, Democrats, former government officials who spoke out against Trump. He's literally talking about weaponizing federal law enforcement for political retribution. But y'all, Democrats are the seditious ones? And we can't talk about accountability without mentioning the Supreme Court justices who gave Trump immunity for his actions while in office. I'm looking at the 6 conservative justices who decided that a president can commit crimes as long as they're official acts. That decision didn't just protect Trump, it gave him the green light to do whatever he wants in this second term without fear of prosecution. Every single one of these people needs to answer for their role in protecting Trump and enabling his criminal behavior. Every single one of them has put party loyalty over constitutional duty. And every single one of them has the audacity to question the patriotism of Democrats who are actually fighting to preserve our democracy. So let's talk about what this really means for you, for your family, for this country. Because this isn't just about Trump calling names or Republicans being hypocrites. We already knew they were good at that. This is about fundamentally changing what kind of country we live in. When the president can pardon people who attack the government in his name, what message does that send? It tells anyone who supports Trump that political violence is okay. That if you're willing to commit crimes for him, he'll protect you. We're not talking hypotheticals here. We're talking about real world consequences. If there's another election Trump doesn't like the results of, what's to stop his supporters from getting violent again? They know now that they'll be pardoned. They know they'll be called patriots. They know Trump will defend them. This means that you, as a regular American, are less safe because the rule of law only works when it applies to everyone equally. When some people get to break the law without consequences because of their political connections, that's not justice, that's corruption, and corruption spreads. It infects every part of government until nothing works the way it's supposed to. For folks in my district, for Black and brown communities across this country, this is especially dangerous. We already know the justice system doesn't treat everyone equally. We've been fighting for decades against over-policing, harsh sentencing, wrongful convictions. And now we're watching mostly white rioters who attack police officers get pardoned while our young people sit in prison for years for nonviolent offenses. How is that justice? How is that equal protection under the law? This also means that the Constitution is only as strong as the people willing to defend it. When Republicans refuse to hold Trump accountable, when they attack anyone who tries to enforce the law, they're telling you that power matters more than principles. They're showing you that they'll abandon democracy if it means keeping their guy in charge. And for anyone who thinks this doesn't affect them, who thinks they can just ignore politics and it'll all work out, let me tell you something, it won't. Because when accountability disappears, when presidents can commit crimes without consequences, when insurrectionists become heroes, we're not living in a democracy anymore. We're living in something else, something dangerous, something our founders fought against. This is about whether we're a nation of laws or a nation of men, whether the Constitution means something or it's just a piece of paper that powerful people can ignore when it's convenient, whether we're going to stand up for what's right or let fear and partisanship destroy everything that makes this country worth fighting for. Now, let me tell you what should happen, what accountability actually looks like in a functioning democracy. Because y'all deserve to know that there's a right way to handle this, even if Trump and his Republican enablers refuse to do it. First, every single person who committed a violent crime on January 6th should serve their full sentence, period. No pardons, no commutations, no special treatment. If you assaulted a police officer, you do your time. If you destroyed federal property, you face the consequences. That's how the justice system is supposed to work for everyone else, and these folks shouldn't get special treatment just because they were supporting Trump. Second, Trump himself should be held accountable for his role in inciting the insurrection. That means the Justice Department should continue its investigation, prosecutors should pursue charges if the evidence supports it, and courts should be allowed to do their job without political interference. No one is above the law, not even a former president. Third, the Republicans in Congress who supported and enabled January 6th need to face consequences. That means censure, removal from committees, and in some cases, expulsion from Congress. The 14th Amendment is clear. People who engage in insurrection are disqualified from holding federal office. We need to enforce that. Fourth, we need a full accounting of what happened on January 6th, including who funded it, who planned it, and who in government knew about it beforehand. The January 6th committee did important work, but there are still unanswered questions, especially about Trump's actions during those critical hours when he refused to call off the mob. And finally, we need to strengthen our laws to prevent this from happening again. That means reforming the Electoral Count Act, clarifying the limits of presidential pardons, making it easier to hold presidents accountable for crimes, and ensuring that domestic terrorism is prosecuted as seriously as any other form of terrorism. This is what should happen in a country that believes in justice and democracy. Now, whether it will happen is another question, especially with Trump back in power and Republicans controlling Congress. But just because something is difficult doesn't mean we stop fighting for it. That's not who we are. So here's what I need y'all to understand. This fight isn't over. Trump can call us seditious all he wants. I wear it as a badge of honor. Because if standing up for the Constitution is sedition, if defending democracy is treason, if refusing to bow down to a wannabe dictator makes me an enemy of the state, then so be it. I'd rather be on the side of justice than on the side of insurrectionists any day of the week. But I can't fight this alone, and neither can my Democratic colleagues. We need you. We need you to pay attention, to stay engaged, to call out the lies when you see them. We need you to remember what happened on January 6th, no matter how much Trump and his allies try to rewrite history. We need you to vote, to organize, to make your voices heard. And most importantly, we need you to reject this gaslighting. Don't let them convince you that up is down, that criminals are patriots, that accountability is sedition. Trust your eyes. Trust your memory. Trust the evidence. I'm going to keep fighting in Congress. I'm going to keep calling out Trump's corruption and his enablers' hypocrisy. I'm going to keep standing up for the rule of law, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular with the people in power, because that's what real patriotism looks like. And y'all, that's what I need you to do too. Stay loud, stay engaged, and let's show them that democracy isn't dead yet.